Okay, today we'll learn about JavaScript functions. Until last lecture, we learned about these data types. Let's look at these JavaScript functions. A JavaScript function is a block of code designed to perform a particular task. Thus, this function is doing something about the functionality, and for the modular design we are making functions. As you learned in other programming language, we can call with different parameters. We learn about this. A JavaScript function is executed when something invokes it. Invoke means when something is calling it. Thus, depending upon that call, it will be called. That is invoked. For example, this function name my function, the parameter here that will be passed, and here that parameter passed that will be used here to do something, some functionality. Here, this let's focus on that JavaScript statement in this script and the slash script. Those are included in this script, and this one is JavaScript function. And here also this one is JavaScript statement. This one is calling that function my function. When this one is calling that function my function, it is passing the parameter 4 and 3, and then that parameter will be passed to here, and that will be used here as an argument that will be calculated. Here, depending upon that JavaScript statement in this function, it will implement a different functionality, and it is returning the result of that multiplication. And the multiplication of 4 and 3, that will be 12. Thus the 12 will be returned, and in this demo or paragraph, the contents will be 12. Thus we can see the result here. Let's look at the syntax. Probably you might have been used a lot about the function in other programming languages. Thus you are very familiar with this function. Probably also, hopefully, a JavaScript function is defined with the function keyword followed by a name, and also that is followed by a parenthesis to pass some parameters. Function names can contain letters, digits, underscore, and the dollar sign, exactly like the same rule like the variable names. And the parentheses here, this one and this one, may include parameter names separated by commas. Thus this one is passing parameters. And the code, JavaScript code to be executed, that is placed inside these curly brackets. There's the JavaScript function that is using that passing parameters, and those are listed inside of that parentheses in the function definition. And that parameter, if that is observed in the function, then that is called function arguments, and that function arguments are the values received by the function when it is invoked. Inside of that function, the arguments behave as local variables. And in other programming language, this function is called procedure or subroutine. Depending upon the programming language, it is using other name, but conceptually those are same. How to call, how to invoke the function, that is called function invocation. When an event occurs, this event handling function, that function may be used for that event handler. For example, when a user clicks a button, then on-click event handler program is composed of that JavaScript statement. We'll look at some examples later. When it is invoked or called from the JavaScript code, then this function will be invoked. Sometimes automatically, that is called self-invocation, and we'll learn later. Function return. Sometimes after the learning the function, we need some returned value, then this JavaScript is returning some value that is implemented using this return statement. And the function that can compute a return value, and that returned value will be returned back to the caller, and the calling JavaScript statement, it will use that returned value. For example, here calculate the product of two numbers here and return the result. Then return the result will be assigned to this variable x. Let's look at the example. Here. Okay, this one is returning the product of A and B. Here A and B, those are past parameters, and here A is 4 because this calling function, my function is sending that passing that parameter. When this one is calling that function, the name is my function, then that parameter will be passed, and that will be used here to get the value to return. That value will be 12, thus that 12 will be returned, and that will be shown here. Why we are using functions? Because we can use again and again, and that means we can define the code once, and we can use it multiple times. And also we can use the same code many times with different arguments. Depending upon the past parameters, the arguments, those will be changed, thus we can get different result. For example, this one is converting the Fahrenheit to the Celsius, thus we are providing the Fahrenheit degree here, then this one is converting to the Celsius degree. Whenever we are providing different value, then this one is calculating depending upon that Fahrenheit. That is a past parameter and variable here. It is very convenient, and it is very good to design the modular program. And let's look at this parenthesis operator. This one is invoking the function. Here accessing a function without parentheses will return the function object instead of the function result. For example, here in the previous case we used the parentheses to get the result, but here if we are missing that parentheses here, then this one is returning the function definition. This one is the returned value, and this one is function definition defined here. This one is returned. If we are using just the empty string, empty parentheses, then let's look at no parameter value is passed to here. There's it cannot calculate, and not the number, but for normal operation we should provide certain value, for example 100. Then let's look at the result. In terms of Celsius degree, in terms of Fahrenheit 100 degree, that is converted to this Celsius degree. Functions used as variable values. The functions can be used the same way as you use variables in all types of formulas, assignments, and calculations. For example, here this one is function, and with this best parameter, this one will be calculated, and here the returned value will be assigned to here, and with this parameter, with this variable, we can concatenate together. In other way, we can implement in this way. Just the function name and parameter. Instead of this, we can use this directly as a variable value. We can get the same result. And here we should learn about the local variables, and we should understand that what is the local variables. What does that mean? With this local variables declared within a JavaScript function, and that is becoming local to the function. And the local means local variables can only be accessed locally from within the function. For example, if we are declaring this car name variable, and that is containing initial value here, and let's look at this real example. Let's focus on that. JavaScript statements. Here, car name, that is the variable name, and this one is containing that value here. And if that is shown as an output, then we can use this one as we used in the previous example. And here this one is simply looking at the type, data type of car name. And that car name is, this one is containing the string. This one is string. And the car name is containing this initial string value. This one is the concatenated result. Next one. Here, this one is using the car name, but main difference is here. This car name is defined and declared only in this function, inside of that function. That means that is being seen locally. But this one is outside of that function. Then this one we cannot understand because that is not declared. That is visible only in this function statement, but outside that is not declared. Thus that is undefined. We can see the result like that. Here let's look at the descriptive statements here. Since local variables are only recognized inside their functions, variables with the same name can be used in different functions because that same name is being used locally. Thus outside that cannot be meaningful. Thus we can use again with different value for different purpose. And local variables are created when a function starts and deleted when the function is completed because that is local. Okay, you can try others here. Okay, now it's time to learn about the objects of the JavaScript. Even though you learned about that object in other language like the C++ or Java, here in JavaScript we are using these objects. Real-life objects, properties, and the method. This one is analogous example to understand better about object. In real life, a car is an object as an analogous example. A car has properties like weight and color and method and so on. Method here, properties here, name, model, weight, color, and method. You can start, drive, brake, stop, and so on. There's those all cars have the same properties, but the property values differ from car to car. Those objects are different. The cars have the same methods, but the methods are performed at different times. Let's look at this JavaScript object. Each property we can assign some value. This is variable. And we can assign some name to that variable. Here we can consider this one very similar in this object concept. Objects are variables too, similarly, but objects can contain many values. Here, car can contain many values. Instead of single value here, Fiat, we can assign many values and with different names here. We can assign. For this car object, we can assign and we can show out the result. Specifically, we can pick this type out and we can show here car and the type here Fiat. In summary, JavaScript objects are containers for named values called properties or method. Thus this name can be called properties. And if that is function, then that is called methods. We'll learn later anyhow. Object definition. In this way, we can define that JavaScript object. This is object literal. How to define, how to create object. here this person object can be created or that can be defined in this way: property and value, property and value. Thus each value has its name. In other way, in terms of this single line, we can use multiple lines like that, but the result is same. Thus we can define using these multiple lines. Object properties. As we learned already in the previous example, we used the name and the value pair. That is called properties. Property and property value we can call in to this property and property value. This is name and this is value. Then how to access that object properties? We can access simply in two ways, like this: object name first, and we should use this dot, and after that property name, or into this square bracket we can use. Inside, that is the property name. For example, here, if we are using the first method, then we can, okay, here, person.first name, this is property name here, and then we can extract, we can access that value John here, and that will be concatenated into this empty string and it is space string here, one space, single space, and it is extracted or accessed string, DOE, DOE. Okay, in this way we can access the property value, or in different way, this one, object name and the square bracket. Inside to this quote, we are using the property name, then we can access like this. We can get the same result. And in terms of the action or movement of an object, we can use this method. Methods are actions that can be performed on objects. Methods are stored in properties as function definition because that is function, but belonging to that object specifically. Here property and property, even that the function name that can contain value, and that value here simple value, but here this one is function definition. This one is called method. Here this one is holding, containing the function definition. Here this is called method, property and method. And sometimes we are using this keyword. In a function definition, this refers to the owner of that function. Here this is the person object in the previous example, and that owns the full name function. Here this one is explained about this. This one is here that refers to the owner of the function. Owner of the function, that is the person object. Here, and that person object is owning that full name function because that is belonging to that object, person. There's this dot first name means the first name property of this object, as we learned. Accessing object method. How to access the property and property values. Here we are learning about the method of accessing object methods. We can access an object method using the following syntax. Here, object name first and the method name. Here, and we can assign that returned result to a certain variable. Let's look at one example here. Here, let's focus on that JavaScript statement here, and that is the object, person object. And here we are trying to get the full name here, full name with these parentheses. Then this result after execution of that function, that means this one is returning this, that means person, first name, that means John, and concatenated to others, John Doe, that will be returned. Here we should be careful about this. If we are omitting this one, then it is returning the function definition, this one. We can access a method without that parentheses. It will return the function definition, as we observed already. And this one is owning comments about the declaration of strings, numbers, and booleans, even though we can declare it this new keyword, and that is not recommended at all, because that variable is created as an object, and we don't like that. Here this one is complicating. This one is declaring X as a string object. We don't need to use that method. Also, to declare Y as a number object, we can use this new keyword, but that is not recommended at all. Thus, this one is the explanation and the recommendation. Please avoid string, number, and Boolean objects. They complicate our code and slow down execution speed. Okay, let's wrap up here and we'll continue. Okay, let's continue. We just completed this JavaScript object. Now it's time to learn about this JavaScript event, this chapter. Okay, JavaScript events. Sometimes in the previous example we might have been used a little bit, but here we are learning a little more in detail about these events. HTML events are things that happen to HTML elements. Thus, this JavaScript is related to the HTML elements, and sometimes some event is happening. Depending upon that, we can provide some dynamic effect with this JavaScript. This one is about that. When JavaScript is used in HTML page, JavaScript can react for dynamic user interface or dynamic user experience, this one can be used for that purpose. HTML events. An HTML event can be something the browser does or something a user does. Thus, the event is happening by browser or by user, and we learn about them. Here are some examples of HTML events. For example, an HTML web page has finished the downloading. Loading is finished. Then we can implement, depending upon that event, that is called onload event. And we'll learn anyhow later. An HTML input field was changed. Some input field, that is input element. In the form element, we are using input field, and that is field, and that is changed. Depending upon that, we can implement some dynamic effect into this JavaScript. Sometimes, if we are clicking some button, then depending upon that action, we can implement some dynamic effect using this JavaScript. Often, when events happen, we may want to do something for dynamic effect, dynamic user interface. Thus, JavaScript lets us execute code when events are detected. That is called event handler. Usually, that is written with the JavaScript statement we learn. HTML allows event handler attribute with the JavaScript code to be added to HTML elements in this way. Here, this is HTML element as we learned already, and this one event, and depending upon that event, if that event is happening, then this is called event handling statement, event handler. This is using JavaScript. And also we can use this single quote or double quote, it doesn't matter. Here, even though we observed this onClick event attribute in the previous examples, even in HTML tutorial, this one is about that. And inside of that quote, this is JavaScript statement. There may be several statements, there may be single, depending upon our application we can use single statement or many multiple statements. Thus, we can see the real example here, even though we observed this example already in the previous example, probably in the HTML tutorial. Here, the time is, that is the name title of this button, and if we are clicking this one, then you can see current date and the time, those are shown here, because here we are using this date. Later we will learn about this date. If we are using this date method, then we can show this current date and the time together. We learn about this method later more in detail. And now here we are learning about this event. This is called onClick event. This is onClick event handling program, an onClick event handling statement written in JavaScript. And here This one is another example, very similar. And this one is the title of that button here. And when we are clicking, then this event handling JavaScript statement is executing this state, and that will be assigned to these contents in HTML of this. This means this object. There's the contents of this object here, this one, that will be changed in this way, like this, because that is assigned to this contents, that is property name in HTML, then that will be changed. Initially that was the time is, this one was the initial character string, but that can be changed in this way because we are using this property in HTML, and that the current date will be assigned to that, like this. And also here we are using another method. This one is showing display date, and the display date is defined here. That is the function, JavaScript function. And here date is also assigned to that, and that is simply shown here. This is paragraph. And that will be simply shown here because this demo is not here. Like this, if we are using the ID name here, in the previous example we don't have any ID name, but here if we are using in this paragraph with this ID name demo, then let's look at this one will be changed because that is that is holding that ID name demo, and that is being changed instead of this previous character string that is being changed to this. And this one is the table about that common HTML events. There are many events, and some of them, those are listed here. Depending upon the change, all event is using this on as a prefix here. As soon as that is being changed, as soon as that is being clicked, mouse over event, that is on change event. Here on click event, there are many others, and we learn others later. When an HTML element has been changed, we can invoke, we can use this event, and we can attach some event handling program, event handling statement, depending upon that event that will be executed. And anyhow, we learn as different examples later, and depending upon the mouse over, depending upon the mouse out event or key down, that means the keyboard key, if that is key pressed, and depending upon that event, we can provide some dynamic effect. This on node. On node means downloading of some web page, and that is completed by the browser, and that has finished loading the page. Then depending upon that event, we can implement some dynamic effect. Okay, you can read this explanation, and let's wrap up here, and we'll continue. And next topic is about the JavaScript strings. Okay, we'll wrap up here, and we'll continue this chapter later.